Our topic for discussion today is Weltanschauung related to psychoanalysis. Weltanschauung is a German word very close to the English word worldview or a paradigm. Refers to the a priori, axiomatic, paradigmatic, context, fundamental beliefs which create the foundation for the science of psychoanalysis. Foundation of any science is always philosophical in nature, because no science can deal with the two ends of any inquiry, the ultimate origin and the ultimate purpose. So ontology and teleology always are philosophical in nature. The super question upon science, why is science what it is? That also is a philosophical question. You cannot answer the question on the nature of science within science. Every science has a philosophical foundation on either side and a philosophical foundation around everything that is there in science. Psychoanalysis is no exception. Psychoanalysis has its own Weltanschauung, and psychoanalysis not only creates its own Weltanschauung, but there is a Weltanschauung in the axiomatic foundations of psychoanalysis. It is very necessary to appreciate the Weltanschauung at the genesis of psychoanalysis. How in the history of psychoanalysis it has got created and what implications it has for concept and practice of psychoanalysis. Two words important to our discourse: metapsychology and the philosophy of science. In our case, philosophy of psychoanalysis. The theory of psychoanalysis is partly observational, empirical. Partly it is inferential, which we call metapsychology. Interpretation works is an empirical part of psychoanalysis. But interpretation works because an Oedipal interpretation was made, is part observational, at times it is metapsychological, and from here we go to something where there is no question about it being metapsychological. For example, the analysis that depression may be because of excess of death drive or thanatos. That's purely a metapsychological position. So every school of psychoanalysis has its own metapsychology and its own set of empirical science. Metapsychology, however, though not empirically scientific, it is still very near to the empirical observations. Maybe qualitative empirical observations, confidential empirical observations, but still empirical observations. But if from the empirical part of psychoanalysis we infer and come back into the more deeper aspects, more esoteric aspects that we call meta-psychology, and if we go further deep and further away from the empirical observation, we go to the philosophy of psychoanalysis, which can deal with questions like why should unconscious exist in the first place? Why should mind exist in the first place? So these are the type of questions which are far removed from the empirical observation. So you have the empirical part of psychoanalysis, the meta-psychological part of psychoanalysis, and the philosophical part of psychoanalysis. And this creates a world of psychoanalysis. In this world, there is an empirical world, there is a meta-psychological world, and there is a philosophical world. What is missed in discourse is the philosophical world has a very strong bearing on the meta-psychological world and the empirical world of psychoanalysis. This is not being appreciated enough, and we will discuss this today, how the philosophical Weltanschauung of psychoanalysis affects its meta-psychology, its concepts, its model of the mind, its pathogenesis, its healing, and therefore healing understanding, and therefore the technique. We'll discuss today these philosophical aspects of the Weltanschauung of psychoanalysis. The first point to appreciate is philosophy governs schools, and this is something which is unsaid. It is in the unconscious of discourse of psychoanalysis. The significance of philosophy, the adherence to philosophy, the strong belief in philosophy governs schools of psychoanalysis, and this is not brought out for discussion. One of the most repressed aspects of psychoanalytic thinking and of those who do psychoanalysis. What happens because of this? Because of this, ideas get filtered out. Say, for example, you have a philosophical belief or a meta-psychological belief on the limits of human potential, and you don't believe it is ever possible to be free or substantially free from the grip of desire and anxiety. Now, this is a meta-psychological or rather a philosophical position, I would say, of psychoanalysis, most schools of psychoanalysis, very different from the East, where the limits of human potential go to the extent of nirvana or supramental transformation or enlightenment. So when you start thinking, you don't even realize how the philosophy, which is deep inside of you, how that philosophy unconsciously governs your thinking, and therefore naturally it will flow into your practice, the control of philosophy. So ideas get filtered out, ideas related to the model of the mind, ideas related to pathogenesis. If, for example, you believe there can be a transpersonal element to pathogenesis, then you look at transpersonal elements, or even if something you find, you just push it aside because you believe it cannot be the cause, something else has to be the cause. Later on with experimentation, when you realize that transpersonal, intergenerational roots of trauma can be found, you realize how philosophy governed your thoughts and how something which was obvious to you 10 years back, you rejected it out of philosophical consideration. So ideas get filtered out. You don't see what you don't want to see. Technique also gets filtered. Take the example of Kohutian technique and the classical psychoanalytic technique. What Kohut calls holding would be called a sin of omission in classical technique. And because it was never to be done, it was never tried and later found to be very effective. So technique also gets filtered because of your meta-psychological and philosophical beliefs. Fortunately, clients are going holistic, although therapists and scholars are not going holistic. Philosophical openness of clients is much higher than that of scholars and practitioners. And we can see how the philosophical differences, how strong the hold of philosophy is on minds of even those who created schools of psychoanalysis. The falling apart of Freud and Jung is essentially a falling apart not only of individuals and observations, but also of the philosophical beliefs. You have falling apart of theist and atheist. You are falling apart of East and West. You don't have any synthesis between a theistic existential psychoanalysis, theistic existential philosophy and psychoanalysis. Because psychoanalysis largely has been a materialist atheistic enterprise. Therefore, many tools which are available in the theistic side were never practiced out in psychoanalysis to the detriment of the patients. We see therefore the effect, the strange hold, the strong hold and the strange hold of metapsychology and philosophy, that they rule the minds of psychoanalytic thinker, the concepts of psychoanalysis and the technique of psychoanalysis. And much of what we can do and not do for the patients, not much I should say, but a part of what we can do and not do for the patients get governed by the philosophy. So let us look at what are the world views, fundamental world views, philosophical views that constitute the Weltanschauung of philosophy for psychoanalysis. There are all the philosophical views can be classified for our discussion into two parts. One position, philosophical position, that there is no design in existence. It leads to primacy of human will. Whatever human free will does in this world, that is the way human life will be and the world will be. And this philosophical view becomes the foundation for the behavioral school. So it is all about human free will. It is all about human conditioning. It is all about rewards and punishment. It is all about self-interest. But essentially, what man will do will determine his fate and the fate of the world. And there is no program or design in terms of a purpose of how events will move. There is no inside structure geared towards a particular purpose, a grand purpose. So this is an approach of no design. And then we have an approach of design, that there exists some design in existence. And this can be taken up in two ways: a materialistic design, which is the thinking of Karl Marx and others, who believe there is a materialistic design. I should put Marx here also from philosophical point, but from psychoanalytic point, Freud and Klein largely are there. That there seems to be a design, there seems to be some forces, there seems to be some program, there seems to be some characteristics of the unconscious which are stable and across the species, which are beyond human will, but there is no God, no soul, no purpose of the universe as the idealists would claim. So this would be a largely a philosophical foundation for Freud and Klein. Then we have design, but without a creator. There is a spiritual element of design. So if we accept there is a design in existence, design can be materialistic or spiritual, and spiritual can be without a creator or with a creator. If you go by the philosophical foundation of there being a design, a spiritual design, but without a creator, you'll end up in schools of Carl Jung, where he stops short of elaborating purpose of human life or of universe in accordance with some God's will or existence of God. And in the Indian context or the Hindu context, we have the Jain school and the Buddhist schools and certain other atheistic schools who talk about existence with a spiritual design but without a creator. So they are atheistic spiritual schools, which is a difficult thing for those who are brought up in the culture of Abrahamical religions, Judaism, Christianity and Islam, to believe there can be a religion without a God. There can be spirituality without God, atheistic spirituality. But it's very common in India. It's a very strong part of the larger Hindu culture. So in Hinduism, you have the theistic religion, theistic spirituality and atheistic spirituality. This philosophical approach leads us to the Jain schools and the Buddhist schools, and all of them, the Jain school, the Buddhist schools and all other schools which follow this principle, they have their own versions of model of the mind, their own versions of how it works, how pathology develops, how to heal. This is something they have heuristically tried for thousands of years, not hundreds, but thousands of years. So we have the second philosophical approach, design, a spiritual design, and therefore there is a concept of soul. Jung stops short of it. He uses self and individuation. So you can just stop there, or you can go to the concept of soul and talk about reincarnation and evolution of the soul. And once you go there, the idea about the mind fundamentally changes, because reincarnational issues then have to be factored into the model of the mind, pathogenesis and healing. So the model of the mind changes, pathogenesis changes, healing methods change, technique changes, the purpose of therapy changes. And then we have a spiritual design, but with a creator, which is the theistic part of Hinduism, which is the classical Veda and the Tantra schools, which believe in God, in soul, in evolution of the soul. And then there are various variations. God apart from the existence, God involved in the existence, dictating history, God setting laws and then partly, occasionally dictating history. All the variations are there. But here, the model of the mind, the way it works, has to factor in suprahuman forces. So the model of the mind becomes open structuralism, Here it can be closed structuralism, but here it is open structuralism, because grace, free will of God, free will of higher beings, they have to be factored in. So the model of the mind has to undergo a change. And once model of the mind undergoes a change, pathogenesis, healing and technique will naturally undergo a change. So model of the mind, pathogenesis, healing, technique, testing, all of them have a strong influence of what you believe here or here. Because your belief here has to get factored in, and all of them have to pass the test of internal consistency with your belief here or your belief here. Most schools in psychoanalysis have avoided clearly going into elaboration of these beliefs, and therefore they are silent, implicit, or at times hidden. So I say there are all schools of psychoanalysis can be divided to full school, three-quarter school, half quarter, and quarter schools. Full schools are those that have a fully articulated philosophy, which no school of psychoanalysis has. Three-quarter schools are those which don't have a clearly articulated philosophy. Philosophy does not come into their model of the mind, pathogenesis or healing or technique, but they have a model of the mind, pathogenesis, healing, technique, and testing. Freudian school, Jungian schools are three-quarter schools. There is no school which is a full school. In the East, you have it, but in psychoanalysis, you don't. Half schools are those which don't have a model of the mind, but they have clear concepts about pathogenesis, technique, testing. And you can have Kleinian school, which is half school, Winnicottian school, Kohutian school, and then you have quarter schools, which essentially focus only on certain particular phenomena for healing. So they don't go much into what happened in early childhood or what to do or deeply explore. Just take up a phenomena or a method and go by it. I would classify ISTDP as one of the quarter schools, where you go a theoretical and you essentially are technique based for healing. You don't get into the conceptual underpinnings of anything. For that, you depend upon other schools, you import from there, and you just put it in terms of a technique. I would classify hypnotherapy also as a quarter school, very alike ISTDP, because both hypnotherapy and ISTDP, they create a state of change and then use the tools once the state of change is created. ISTDP creates a state of anxiety in the striated muscles, and hypnotherapy creates a state of trance. And in that state, once created, you bring in tools from all other schools of psychoanalysis or psychotherapy. Now, this leads to a very important question, the philosophical discussion. What can be expected from man and the world? If you go into the philosophy of no design, you will come to the behavioralist or existential position of man will be what he makes out of himself, and the world will be what the man makes out of the world. There is no purpose, no solace, no optimism, no destined grand end to reach, and no great story of the beginnings. If you believe in design and you get to the materialistic position of design, you get into the Freud-Einstein conversation, where Einstein wrote a letter to Freud in the Second World War when the Jewish Holocaust was on why man is so angry and destructive, and can something be done to solve this problem? Freud replies that the forces of aggression and sadism are so high in man and so easily they can get manufactured because of frustration of any desire or by virtue of constitutional elements of high death instinct itself, that it's very difficult to find a solution. And Freud was very pessimistic about man's future, that these unconscious destructive forces will be the undoing of man. And therefore, there is nothing very positive to look forward to. What we have at present, the half solution, is the best solution possible. So half solution is the best solution. Very pessimistic view which emanates from that materialism. Karl Marx had a very positive view but emanating out of the same materialism. If you believe in spiritual design without a creator, you redefine the limits of human potential more liberally and you become more positive, more purposeful. You become more optimistic and you get to Jung's concept of individuation as to what man can make out of himself. In the East, you go into the Buddhist concept of nirvana. This is what man can make out of himself. Or the Jain concept of Kaivalya. If you believe in the spiritual design, from a Vedic point, you get into merger with the universe. From Sri Aurobindo's point, you get into supramentalization of oneself. And self-change and world change then become destined. You become positive, you look forward to a grand ending to the world. So there is then a grand story of beginning and a grand story of the end. Life becomes purposeful. There comes into existence some justice, some celebration, which supersedes all that is a limited everyday experience. So based upon where you are, the goal of therapy changes. And this is the effect of philosophical belief that you have. And once the goal of therapy changes, the model of the mind changes, pathogenesis changes, the whole therapy undergoes a change. Therefore, the philosophical foundation of the school that you are following, explicitly or implicitly, has a governing hold on the way therapy happens, on technique, on pathogenesis, on the goal of therapy, on how you will make a conversation. So the goal changes, limits of human potential gets differently defined, limits of the world potential gets differently defined. Optimism to pessimism, pessimism to optimism, you undergo a change. Purpose of the individual undergoes a change. Purpose of his mind, model of the mind, pathogenesis, healing technique, testing, all of these undergo a change based upon the philosophy that governs you. Can therefore a school be created which can be more comprehensive in terms of model of the mind, pathogenesis, healing and technique, and one can attempt integration of schools. It's an old idea, very difficult, most have failed. We don't know what exact shape it will take, but people do know, and we also know what generic characteristics that integrated school will have. One, it will be modular. Two, it will be comprehensive so that parts of it come out as the schools we have at present. So every school at present becomes a specific instance in a given context of that master school. That master school, when applied to different contexts, certain parts can be removed, certain parts can be enhanced, and it becomes one of the schools that we have at present. For example, if we have a school that goes into all the chakras and their details, when it gets into the sex center, it almost looks like the Freudian school. When it gets into the root chakra, it almost looks like the Kleinian school. Gets into the solar plexus, it almost looks like the Alfred Adler school. Gets into the heart chakra, looks like Eric Fromm's school. Gets into the Ajna chakra, looks like a cognitive school. So a comprehensive school can be shaped into different schools. It has to be more cast in terms of elementals, fundamental to the phenomena of all schools. So unless we go into the structural fundamental blocks which are involved, blocks and forces which are involved in phenomena, all psychoanalytic phenomena, there cannot be a convergence of different phenomena which appear so different. Each school then becomes a specific instance of the master school. One attempt is a model of the mind, be it holistic elemental analysis and therapy. One attempt at creating a master school. What can we do in the light of today's discussion? First, evaluate your school. Is your school a full school? If not, can you work to convert it into a full school? A full school which has a philosophy, a model of the mind, pathogenesis, and healing techniques. What is the philosophical Weltanschauung of your school? Articulate clearly. If not there, create one. See, often there would be an implicit philosophical foundation, articulate it. And then see how does it shape or restrict your school. For example, if your school does not give any significance to thoughts, think about what would happen if you give significance, how differently you would look at phenomena, how many more tools will be available. If the philosophical belief was expanded or changed, how would it influence your school? In terms of model of the mind, pathogenesis, healing tools and techniques. And once you go into these questions, the question will be what to do. So if philosophy is not there, create one. If it is implicit, articulate, see how it helps or restricts, and then take a call what to do about it. It will enrich you, psychoanalysis, healing, and it will enrich the quality of life of patients. Thank you.